In this modern age of shopping malls and online carts, we have become comfortable with the act of acquiring, yet in this age of convenience, few pause to ask, what exactly are we bringing home? There was once a time when people knew the weight of symbols. A charm was not just jewelry, a mask was not merely decoration, and a book with strange symbols was not considered entertainment. But now, what was once hidden in shadow has been shelved between scented candles and casual fashion. Today, I want to open your eyes not with fear, but with wisdom. Walk into some of these trendy stores, and you'll find shelves lined with healing crystals, tarot cards, incense for cleansing energies, and books that instruct on rituals, all beautifully packaged under the umbrella of self-care. But the truth is, not every energy is good energy. These tools have ancient ties to rituals that were never meant for casual play. What seems like harmless merchandise may, in fact, be invitations unspoken, spiritual permissions we unknowingly grant. Stores that sell dream catchers, spirit masks, and animal totems may boast cultural appreciation, but many are blind to the spiritual roots of such items. It is one thing to respect a culture, but it is another to commercialize sacred objects stripped of their spiritual warning labels. A wall hanging shaped like a pentagram is not neutral just because it's in pastel pink. Yes, they exist, often marketed as alternative or Gothic lifestyle. Inside, you will find Ouija boards, spell books, candles dressed for ritual work, and statues of pagan gods. These items are not fantasy props. They were created for spiritual operations, some rooted in traditions that oppose the very light we were made to walk in. You might be surprised to find entire sections in popular bookstores labeled New Age, Magic, or Witchcraft. These aren't fiction titles. These are manuals teaching real rituals, chants, and spellcasting. The normalization of sorcery, especially to the young, is one of the quietest dangers of our time. You would not willingly drink poison if the bottle was clearly labeled. But what if the label said empowerment? You scroll through an app and it suggests a tarot deck because you once clicked on a zodiac meme. Now it's offering you a beginner's spell kit. The danger is not just in the item, but in the ease of access. What once took initiation now takes one click. These digital stores don't just sell, they whisper, suggesting that there is nothing to fear in the darkness. We must be watchers, not out of paranoia, but out of principled awareness. The heart of the matter is not to live in fear, but to live with discernment. Our homes should be places of peace, not confusion, and our hearts should not be split between light and darkness. Every object we bring into our space either reflects what we stand for or subtly erodes it. So avoid these items, avoid these stores, not because you're weak, but because you are wise, not because you're afraid of darkness, but because you choose to live in the light. May your steps be steady, your choices intentional, and your home be a place of peace. In the rhythm of our modern lives, consumption has become not just a habit, but almost a ritual. We wake, we work, we shop. We celebrate by purchasing, we comfort ourselves with packages, and we decorate our lives with the things we find on shelves or in digital carts. In such a world, the line between need and desire, truth and trend, becomes dangerously blurred. The average consumer thinks little about the spiritual residue of what they are bringing home. We assume that because it is sold openly, it must be safe. Because it is legal, it must be harmless, and because it is fashionable, it must be good. But history has always shown that moral decay rarely arrives as a monster. It often comes clothed in style and convenience. Discernment, true, inner discernment, is not merely about knowing right from wrong. It is about sensing what is almost right, yet deeply wrong beneath the surface. We are in an era where evil no longer needs to wear a frightening mask. It can be sold under soft lighting, with ambient music, and minimalist packaging. And when people lose the habit of questioning what they consume, they lose something far more than just money. They risk the peace of their homes, the purity of their thoughts, and the clarity of their spiritual compass. Go into many of today's retail stores and you'll notice something subtle but consistent. In between the everyday items, mugs, lamps, journals, you begin to see symbols. A crescent moon etched onto a notebook, a statue with its hands formed into a ritualistic gesture, a crystal pyramid promising clarity or protection. We walk past these without blinking because marketing has trained us to believe these things are aesthetic, quirky, harmless. But in centuries past, these were not decorations, they were sacred tools, and not all sacred things are holy. In fact, some were intentionally crafted to attract forces that do not wish you well, and so we must ask, when did we stop questioning? When did we decide that the spiritual meaning of an item no longer mattered as long as it matched our furniture? It is not an act of superstition to care about these things, it is an act of wisdom. The home, after all, is not just four walls. It is an environment, a spiritual ecosystem, a place of formation for the soul. What we place in our homes speaks to what we tolerate, and what we tolerate often becomes what we normalize. And what we normalize becomes what we eventually defend. The truth is, many consumers today are spiritually asleep, lulled into passivity by the lullabies of advertising. The shelves are filled not just with products, but with ideas, symbols, belief systems cleverly disguised. And in these days, we forget that even silence is a choice. Ignorance, too, is a form of consent. We may not have meant to invite spiritual confusion, anxiety, or unrest into our homes, but intention does not always protect us from consequences. A door left open unintentionally still lets the wind or the wolf walk through. Now, someone might say, but I only bought that because it looked cool, or it's just a design. But symbols are not powerless because we don't understand them. Fire will still burn you, even if you didn't mean to get close. The spiritual realm does not play by the rules of human casualness, and this is why discernment must rise again, especially among the young. Not paranoia, not legalism, but discernment, the ability to ask, what is this object doing in my life? What is it silently teaching me or my children? Does it carry the residue of light or the scent of darkness? This is not about condemning the act of shopping or fearing every trinket. It is about reawakening to the fact that our choices, even in the smallest things, matter. Every object carries a presence, or at least a direction. Some things draw us inward toward clarity and truth. Others, though lovely on the outside, pull us quietly toward chaos, confusion, or moral drift. In a consumer culture, the war is no longer fought in the open fields, it is fought in the mind, in the store aisle, and in the home. And those who do not practice discernment become passive participants in their own erosion. The first step to guarding your life, then, is not to fight what is outside, but to see clearly what is already inside your environment. It starts by asking better questions, noticing what others ignore, and remembering that not all gifts come wrapped in blessing. When we truly learn discernment, we no longer ask, "Can I have this?" but "Should I welcome this?" And in that small change, we rediscover the ancient wisdom that what we possess also begins to possess us unless we are wise enough to take authority over what we allow into our lives. If discernment is the doorway to wisdom, then understanding symbols is the key to that door. In the earlier reflection, we examined how modern consumerism has numbed our awareness of what we bring into our homes. Now we must go a step further into the realm of symbols, because the reality is this: many of the things we buy are not just things. They carry meanings, histories, and spiritual directions. The modern world has trained us to think of symbols as decorations. A crescent moon is just a vibe. A pentagram is just art. An eye inside a triangle. Just vintage, But this approach is tragically shallow. In truth, symbols are like spiritual passwords. They unlock access, convey identity, and declare allegiance. Whether you recognize it or not, every symbol communicates something in the unseen world. A national flag, for example, is just clothed with colors and shapes, but millions have died defending it because it means something. In the same way, spiritual symbols are not powerful because you believe in them. They're powerful because they were crafted to represent spiritual forces, some that welcome peace, and others that invite unrest, confusion, or worse. The danger lies not in the fact that these symbols exist, but in our cultural habit of neutralizing them. Once upon a time, you had to go to remote places, underground groups, or secret gatherings to find witchcraft paraphernalia. Today, it's printed on t-shirts sold to teenagers in major retail chains. It's woven into yoga mats, jewelry, notebooks, perfumes, even children's cartoons. What used to be clearly dark has been repackaged as edgy, ironic, or empowering. But no amount of glitter can purify the source. A crystal on a chain is not just a rock. It might look harmless, but when it's sold with instructions on how to charge it under the moon, manifest love, or repel negative energy, it has stepped into spiritual territory. And the symbols etched into these tools are not meaningless. They are intentional, often traced back to traditions that have nothing to do with divine truth, and everything to do with harnessing forces we were never meant to play with. Even the placement of symbols matters. A mirror shaped into an infinity loop placed in your home is said to trap energy. Some tapestries include sigils, ancient magical markings, woven into the design. You may see them and feel nothing, but spiritually they are like codes, and just like a computer responds to certain commands regardless of the user's intent, so do these symbols interact with the spiritual atmosphere, regardless of our ignorance. The most tragic part, many people unknowingly purchase these items thinking they're just quirky, trendy, or artsy. But when anxiety starts to creep in, when sleep becomes restless, when the home begins to feel heavy, they look everywhere except the shelf above their bed or the corner of their living room. We've been taught to ignore the idea that the physical world can influence the spiritual one, and vice versa. But this disconnect is not innocent. It's dangerous, and yet the problem is not simply in the object itself, but in the intent behind its design and use. If someone gifts you a necklace with a symbol they don't understand, and you wear it proudly, the spiritual realm does not excuse you just because you were unaware. There is no "I didn't mean to" clause in the laws of spiritual influence. A symbol works not because it convinces you, but because it aligns with something already active and waiting to respond. This is why discernment must always be followed by understanding. We cannot afford to be blind in a symbol-saturated world. Marketing, fashion, and entertainment industries have mastered the art of embedding meaning into objects, but the meanings have not disappeared. They have only become more subtle. Our ancestors knew better, which is why many cultures treated certain objects with caution, not superstition. They understood that symbols are not toys, they are declarations, visual prayers, covenants, or invitations, and here lies the responsibility. If we are to live lives of clarity and peace, we must train ourselves, and especially the younger generation, to see again, to look beyond the product and ask, what does this represent? Where does this symbol come from? Why is it here? When we begin to ask those questions, we will begin to reclaim the power of awareness. And once we become aware, we will no longer decorate our lives with darkness disguised as light. So when you walk through a store, whether physical or digital, remember that you are not just choosing what pleases the eye, you are, often unknowingly, choosing what enters your spiritual space. And what you allow to enter may begin to shape the atmosphere around you subtly, slowly, but surely. Once we recognize that symbols are not innocent, we must naturally ask, how did they become so common? How did ancient sigils, spiritual talismans, and occult references find their way into children's backpacks, cosmetic packaging, and television storylines? This leads us to a troubling but undeniable reality. The occult is no longer lurking in shadows. It has been normalized, invited into mainstream culture, rebranded, and mass marketed under the labels of spirituality, empowerment, and individual freedom. This normalization has not occurred suddenly. It has taken decades of cultural shifts, entertainment strategies, and philosophical reprogramming to bring us to this point. What was once feared or rejected is now curated into aesthetics. We no longer see a tarot card and think danger, we think mystery. We don't see a book on witchcraft and think beware, we think self-exploration. This quiet transformation has been so gradual that even the discerning eye often misses how deeply it has saturated our everyday environment. Entertainment has been one of the most powerful vehicles for this shift. In decades past, magic and sorcery were framed as dangerous, even evil, in films and literature. But as time passed, the narrative changed. Magic became a metaphor for identity. Sorcery became a symbol of freedom. The witch, once a villain, became the misunderstood hero. The storyline flipped, and with it, our sympathies. Now, shows and movies for children openly feature spellcasting, hexes, spirit guides, and summoning rituals, presented as innocent adventures or just fantasy. But there is nothing fantasy about training young minds to see darkness as desirable. Meanwhile, the fashion and lifestyle industries followed suit. Clothing lines adopted astrological signs, crescent moons, and all-seeing eye motifs without concern for what these icons truly represent. Beauty brands began naming their products after spells, crystals, and goddesses from pagan pantheons. Jewelry pieces started to resemble ancient amulets, sold not just as style, but with alleged spiritual benefits. What once required initiation into secret societies is now being sold during seasonal sales at major department stores. Even wellness culture, which at first glance seems noble, offering healing, peace, and mental clarity, has absorbed the occult in the name of balance and energy. Practices like smudging, crystal grids, moon rituals, and guided spirit journeys have become common recommendations in blogs, therapy offices, and yoga studios. These acts, regardless of intention, were not invented for aesthetic relaxation. They were designed for spiritual exchange. And yet they've been rebranded as tools for self-care, effectively removing the caution and accountability they once required. But perhaps the most alarming development is not what is being introduced, but who it is being introduced to. Children and teenagers are now the prime audience for occult content. Animated series, young adult books, gaming platforms, and social media influencers all subtly, sometimes overtly, expose them to spiritual practices that once would have shocked their parents. Ritualistic language, spell chants, and familiar spirits are no longer hidden or whispered. They are trending, and the younger generation, many of whom are unrooted in spiritual truth, are drawn in not out of malice but curiosity. Curiosity, however, without guidance, is one of the quickest paths to bondage. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that much of this is marketed under the language of liberation. Do what feels right. Follow your truth. There is no right or wrong, only energy. These ideas sound appealing, even compassionate, but they strip away moral clarity and spiritual safety. In such a world, anything is allowed, nothing is questioned, and everything is treated as harmless exploration. But there is no such thing as neutral spirituality. Every path leads somewhere. Every invitation welcomes a guest, and not all guests bring peace. What was once called rebellion is now called freedom. What was once labeled darkness is now embraced as alternative light. This is the great inversion, where the sacred is mocked and the profane is honored, and most people, good, well-meaning people, have no idea it's happening. They walk into stores, click on ads, watch movies with their families, and unknowingly open the door to influences that slowly shape their thinking, their values, and their atmosphere. The rise of occult normalization is not merely a cultural trend, it is a spiritual campaign. It doesn't require your belief to be effective, it only needs your participation, and participation often comes through silence, passivity, or the dangerous phrase, "It's not that deep," but the truth is, it is that deep. The normalization of darkness is only possible when people stop seeing it as darkness, and by the time they realize something is wrong, it has already settled into their homes, their language, their playlists, and their children's imaginations. This is why understanding the reality of symbols and the urgency of discernment matters so deeply. Because once something becomes normal, it no longer raises alarms. And when alarms fall silent, people stop locking their doors. In a culture where the occult has been dressed up as decoration, the wise must learn not to be fooled by appearances. Not everything that glitters is light. As the normalization of occult themes continues to spread through entertainment, fashion, and wellness culture, we must now confront a more uncomfortable but crucial truth: physical objects can carry spiritual influence. This truth is often dismissed in modern thinking, which separates the material from the spiritual as if they are different worlds with no interaction. But that separation is artificial. In reality, the physical and the spiritual are deeply connected, and in many cases, the physical becomes the gateway for spiritual activity. Think of how certain environments make you feel the moment you enter. Some places carry a sense of calm without a word being spoken. Others feel heavy, chaotic, or oppressive, even when they're clean and well lit. This isn't about superstition. It's about the fact that objects, spaces, and atmospheres often retain the residue of what they represent or have been used for. In the same way that a scent can trigger memory, an object can trigger spiritual effects. The ancient world understood this well. Items used in pagan worship, divination, or ritual were never seen as neutral. They were believed to attract or channel specific spiritual forces. An idol wasn't just a statue, it was a point of contact. A charm wasn't just metal, it was a symbol of protection, power, or invitation. These beliefs weren't fantasy, they were based on observed consequences. Even in faith traditions that rejected paganism, there was an awareness that objects could carry either blessing or curse. The mistake of our generation is to assume that all that wisdom was ignorance. Modern retail culture has taught us to treat everything as decoration. A dream catcher is just for aesthetics. A Buddha statue is calming. A pentagram pendant is just a fashion choice. But when you trace the origin of these items, you find something else entirely. Many were designed for spiritual functions, to invoke, to ward off, to channel, to bind. And when we purchase and display them without knowledge, or worse, with casual amusement, we ignore the spiritual realities they still represent. Physical objects, especially those with spiritual histories or symbolic design, act as conduits. They may not have power in themselves, but they were created with intention, and spiritual forces respond to intention. A deck of tarot cards may seem like cardboard, but its design and use were born out of systems that seek knowledge and power apart from divine truth. The same is true of ritual masks, animal totems, crystal grids, or tools for spellcasting. These objects do not just sit idly, they participate, silently but actively, in shaping the environment they inhabit. People often report strange changes after introducing certain objects into their homes. Nightmares increase, arguments become frequent, anxiety deepens, sleep is disturbed, children grow fearful without explanation. Pets become restless. These are often dismissed as coincidence, but they follow a consistent pattern, one that spiritual traditions across centuries have recognized. When an atmosphere changes after a spiritual object is introduced, it is not the decor that's shifted, it's the domain. And this influence is not limited to obvious occult items. Sometimes the danger lies in subtlety. Art that features distorted faces, demonic themes, or symbols of death, though marketed as edgy or expressive, can contribute to a sense of heaviness in a room. Music albums sold with occult imagery often carry more than lyrical influence. Even fashion items featuring runes, sigils, or binding symbols have more than cultural impact. They affect the atmosphere around the wearer. Again, it is not about paranoia. It is about spiritual physics. What you allow into your environment begins to shape the environment's tone. This is not to say every item with a mysterious origin is cursed, but it is to say that ignorance is not protection. Just as you would not drink a bottle without checking its label, you should not decorate your life with symbols or tools whose meanings you do not understand. The world may call it culture or freedom of expression, but spiritual forces are not moved by human vocabulary. They respond to alignment. If an object aligns with darkness, even if innocently acquired, it can still invite the influence of that darkness. This truth becomes even more serious when children are involved. Young people are spiritually sensitive. What they see, wear, or play with impacts not just their emotions, but their spiritual openness. Dolls modeled after occult themes, spell, casting kits labeled as games, and animated shows that normalize rituals all plant seeds that grow quietly. Parents may allow these things thinking they're harmless, but children are far more perceptive than we realize. They often feel what adults have learned to ignore. Physical objects are not neutral. They are declarations, invitations, or warnings. Some are symbols of peace and beauty. Others, though glittering and well marketed, carry with them a trace of chaos. And chaos doesn't stay contained. It seeps, it expands, and it often begins with one small item sitting unnoticed on a shelf. To live with spiritual clarity, we must examine not only what we believe, but what we allow. Because what we allow eventually surrounds us, and what surrounds us shapes how we think, feel, and live. Objects have voices, not in sound but in spirit. The question is, whose voice are they amplifying? If we accept that physical objects can carry spiritual influence, then we must develop the ability to recognize which items carry that influence. Discernment becomes more than an abstract virtue. It becomes a practical skill. Just as a trained eye can detect counterfeit currency or spoiled food, the spiritually aware person must learn to identify merchandise that brings more than what the price tag reveals. The difficulty, however, is that such items are not labeled as dangerous. They are not hidden in the dark corners of strange shops. On the contrary, they are presented with polish, beauty, and sophistication. They appear in popular retail chains, lifestyle stores, digital platforms, and even children's toy aisles. They are marketed as gifts, home decor, jewelry, relaxation aids, or educational tools. In many cases, the danger is not in how they look, but in what they represent, and what they were created to do. One of the most common examples is the commercialization of spiritual tools that originated in occult or pagan traditions. Tarot cards, oracle decks, pendulums, and spell books now come in pastel colors, minimalist designs, and starter kits aimed at beginners or teens. What used to be hidden in ritual spaces is now sold between journals and scented candles. These tools are not just alternative hobbies. They are spiritual instruments designed to open communication with forces beyond the natural world. That purpose has not changed just because the packaging is cuter. Then there are crystals, marketed as tools for healing, protection, or manifestation. Crystals in themselves are part of the natural world. They are not inherently evil, but the way they are used can change their spiritual role. When people are told to charge crystals with intentions under moonlight, place them in certain patterns for energy alignment, or wear them as talismans for attraction and power, the object has moved from geology into spirituality. At that point, the crystal is not just decor, it becomes a substitute altar, a spiritual medium. Another category to watch closely is symbols. As we've already seen, symbols are not neutral. Merchandise bearing pentagrams, all-seeing eyes, snakes wrapped around staffs, inverted crosses, sigils, ancient runes, and astrological glyphs may be presented as trendy or aesthetic, but these symbols are rooted in very specific spiritual meanings. They have been used for centuries in occult practices, and those meanings don't dissolve just because they're printed on a hoodie or phone case. Wearing such symbols, even unknowingly, can open doors in ways most people never expect. Even in the home decor section, vigilance is required. Items such as dream catchers, spirit masks, totem statues, or Eastern religious figurines may appear artistic. But many of these objects were originally created for spiritual purposes, often involving rituals of summoning, protection, or worship of deities unrelated to divine truth. When these items are placed in the home, they do not simply serve an aesthetic function. They change the spiritual tone of the room. Some report unease, conflict, or heaviness soon after their introduction, but rarely make the connection. Clothing and accessories, too, have become vehicles for spiritually loaded content. Fashion brands now frequently use occult designs for edgy appeal. Robes styled like ceremonial garments, jewelry in the form of moons and serpents, shirts with magical incantations printed in subtle fonts. Often the wearer has no idea what the symbols mean, but meaning doesn't vanish due to ignorance. Wearing a symbol is a form of agreement. It is a visual endorsement, silent but potent. Even in children's items, spiritual danger is becoming more difficult to spot. Dolls designed to resemble witches, media franchises built around spellcasting, books that encourage kids to cast harmless spells using kitchen items. These are often seen as cute or creative, but they desensitize the next generation to very real spiritual activity. What is played with casually today becomes normalized tomorrow, and eventually embraced with seriousness in adulthood. Recognizing dangerous merchandise, then, is not about memorizing a list of forbidden items. It is about learning to ask deeper questions. What is this object used for? What tradition does it come from? What symbols are present? What instructions or practices are attached to it? Is this item spiritually passive, or does it carry intention? Is it simply decorative, or has it been created with ritual purpose? Another key indicator is the emotional or spiritual atmosphere surrounding the item. Pay attention to how certain things make you feel. Do you sense tension, confusion, or heaviness when you're near it? Has the mood in your home shifted since bringing it in? Are dreams becoming darker or more chaotic? These are not guaranteed signs, but they are common patterns that reveal a deeper layer at work. The goal is not to fear every unfamiliar object, but to reclaim the practice of spiritual evaluation. For too long, people have accepted whatever is offered, trusting appearances instead of wisdom. But a spiritually healthy life requires more than open-mindedness. It requires boundaries, and boundaries begin with the ability to recognize when something beautiful on the surface is spiritually corrosive at its core. Once a person begins to recognize spiritually dangerous merchandise and becomes aware of how easily deception wears the mask of beauty, the next logical question arises. What now? Awareness is the first step, but awareness alone is not protection. At some point, discernment must become decision. It is not enough to avoid the darkness. We must also choose the light actively, consistently, and even at the cost of personal convenience or social acceptance. The culture we live in does not reward spiritual separation. It praises openness, celebrates experimentation, and mocks conviction as being judgmental or close-minded. But choosing light in such an environment is not a passive preference. It is a deliberate stand. When you say no to objects, practices, and trends that many accept without question, you are not simply being different. You are resisting a current, and that resistance will often be misunderstood. But spiritual clarity comes at a price. The price is often rejection, discomfort, or the loss of what once seemed attractive. Choosing light means that some books must be removed from the shelf. Some gifts may need to be returned. Some clothes will no longer be worn. Some media will no longer be watched, not because you fear these things in themselves, but because you recognize the power behind them and you refuse to partner with it. Every object removed, every habit broken, becomes a quiet declaration. I will no longer host what does not belong to the light. This process is not legalism, it's alignment. You are not obeying rules to earn anything. You are responding to truth in order to walk freely. In the same way, a doctor removes toxins from a diet to protect a patient. The spiritually wise remove influences from their environment to guard their atmosphere. There is no condemnation in that choice, only clarity and protection. Choosing light also means intentionally surrounding yourself with what uplifts the soul and strengthens the spirit. If darkness is subtle and suggestive, light is equally gentle, but far more transformative. Filling your space with sacred texts, uplifting music, pure imagery, and items that carry personal or divine meaning shifts the spiritual climate of your home. Objects created with love, humility, and reverence for truth carry a peace that cannot be faked. You don't need incense or charms to achieve spiritual peace. You need alignment, truth, integrity, and order. Light brings peace, not just silence, but deep soul-level rest. When your atmosphere is clean, your thoughts settle. Your sleep deepens, your relationships become more grounded, your creativity flows. This is not abstract poetry. It is observable reality. Many who remove spiritually tainted items from their homes often report immediate change. Tension lifts, nightmares stop, arguments decline. The difference is tangible because the source of interference has been removed. But choosing light also means choosing truth over trend. Popularity has never been a compass for spiritual safety. What is praised by the masses is often tolerated because it entertains, not because it heals. You will have to say no to what everyone else says yes to. You will have to walk out of stores with empty hands. You will have to explain to others why you don't use certain words, wear certain brands, or hang certain decorations. And you may do it all quietly without applause, but that quiet obedience creates space for something louder, peace, power, and purpose. This decision must also be renewed over time. Light is not a one-time choice, it is a daily lifestyle. You may find new temptations disguised in clever packaging. A trendy book with spiritual undertones, a playlist that sounds good but carries darkness in its lyrics, a product marketed as empowering that echoes ancient rituals. Discernment must stay active because the darkness never stops reinventing itself, but the more you walk in light, the easier it becomes to spot the counterfeit. Your spirit grows sharper. You begin to sense what is off before you even know why. This is the maturity that develops when you refuse to compromise, and yet choosing light is not just about self-protection. It's also about influence. Your home becomes a safe place for others. Your life becomes a signal to those quietly searching for purity in a chaotic world. Children raised in a light-filled environment grow up sensitive to what is false. Friends may begin to ask why your space feels peaceful. You may find yourself suddenly counseling others on what to remove from their own lives, not with pride, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has been there and knows the cost of compromise. You cannot remove darkness by cursing it. You remove it by replacing it. You drive it out by introducing something greater. Choosing light is not about fear, it is about alignment. It is not a rejection of beauty, culture, or art. It is the embrace of a higher standard, one that calls things by their true name and refuses to be seduced by trends that lead away from peace.